This is the Sony ZV-1 M2, and things are getting a little bit complicated with this whole ZV lineup. So Z stands for Generation Z, V stands for video or vlogger, and then whatever comes after that just depends. If there's an E, then it's an E mount. Could be the ZV-E10, which I have here, which is an APS-C camera. If it's the ZV-E1, well, that's the new full frame model. Anyway, this is not a full frame camera. This is the replacement to the very original ZV-1, and thereby they're calling it the ZV-1 M2 or the ZV-1 Mark II. Anyway, let's check it out and see what is new. Sony sent this review unit to me a few weeks ago, so I've had some time to play with it already. I don't have the retail packaging, but this camera is part of Sony's plan to save the environment, so the packaging is almost entirely recycled and plant-based with no plastic. There's not much in terms of accessories. You get the camera, a windscreen dead cat, a tiny NP-BX1 battery, charging brick, and a USB-C cable. Yes, USB-C at last. The camera is small, light, made of mostly this textured plastic that doesn't feel particularly high-end, but this is an entry-level camera, so that is to be expected, I suppose. The thing about these small cameras that is the most frustrating is that they have no grip whatsoever, so if you are trying to hold on to it, you have to do so by pinching the camera with your thumb and 3 forefingers. It works, but it's about as comfortable as using your phone one-handed while riding a unicycle uphill. I think this is part of the reason why Sony created and sent me this tripod grip, which features all of the important buttons that you'll need to control your camera comfortably with one hand. Now back to the camera. It weighs just 290 grams with the battery, which is impressively light, and you have to consider that it has a lens attached to it already, a zoom lens. This one is a Zeiss Vario Sonar T-Star that does f1.8 to f4, and the zoom range is 6.9mm to 17.6mm. You might be thinking that's perfect for my real estate photography business, but you'd be wrong because this camera has a 1-inch sensor and a crop factor of 2.7, meaning that the 6.9mm lens on the wide end is really equivalent of an 18.6mm full frame lens, which is still wide, much wider than the original ZV-1, which had the equivalent of a 24 to 70mm on it. And that camera was intended for vlogging, which if you were vlogging with it and you had active stabilization turned on, which also cropped in by 10% or so, your arm would have to be, I don't know, 7 feet long for you to really get a decent portrait shot. Otherwise, it was just your face covering up the entire frame like this. So that is the first big news. The old 24 to 70 equivalent has been replaced with a lens that is, let's say, 18 to 50mm equivalent. And that alone is a huge update. The biggest complaint about the original ZV-1 has always been that it's not quite wide enough for vlogging, which is the point of the camera. Well, again, Sony fixed it with the Mark II. The sensor on this new camera is a 1-inch Exmor RS, which is a stacked CMOS sensor. The camera does 4K 30, full HD, up to 120p, slow and quick motion. It has electronic stabilization with a slight crop, a built-in 3-stop ND filter, and all of the newest autofocus features minus the AI ones. This includes phase detection, multiple face recognition, real-time tracking, real-time IAF for humans and animals. There's a new cinematic vlog setting which you can set up, and it makes your footage look like this with no editing or post-production whatsoever, which is cool. It adds black bars to make the video 2.35 to 1. It changes the frame rate to 24. It changes the contrast into 1 of 5 choices, the color tone into 1 of 4 choices, and changes the autofocus transition speed into 1 of 3 choices. It might be a little gimmicky, but it can be used to tell a story in the middle of a vlog, and it is a fun feature. This camera also has creative looks, S-Log3 gamma curves, and S-Gamut3.Cine color for editing. A newer feature called Face Priority Auto Exposure, which optimizes your exposure if you are in an area with changing light conditions. The microphone has also been improved now with an intelligent 3-direction setup. You can choose to turn the pickup to front, rear, all directions, or auto, which will change the direction based on where the camera is pointed and where the sound is coming from. This is, in my opinion, the second biggest update after the wider lens. It makes for an onboard camera mic that is good enough in most situations. This is a camera that you don't really need to buy an extra external mic for. There is a product showcase button here and a background defocus button, which both are not new features, but useful features nonetheless for making product review videos for sure. Big improvement number 3 is the menu system, which now looks like the menu system in all recent Sony releases. If you have an FX30, for example, you'll be familiar. This is a massive deal because it allows for such ease of use. You can swipe in from the sides or from the bottom and change settings with the touchscreen, and in theory, you never have to get into the menu system. Comparing this to the menu system on the ZV-10, which is the old style, it's a night and day difference. And then there are some other small things to mention. The new Creators app, a new self-timer feature which starts recording in a few seconds after you press the record button, and streaming support, and again that USB-C port that I mentioned. So all in all, it is a well-featured camera that answers many, if not all, of the complaints that people had about the original ZV-1. And undoubtedly this will be better received than the ZV-1F, which was for some reason hated by most people on the internet. But anyway, let's see what this camera can do outside in the real world, and let's see how bad my vlogging attempts can be. And this is really mostly my wife trying to vlog for me. So let's take a look. Ready, set, go.
We are headed to Waco! We have coffee, we have kids, right? We have a driver, and we're ready to go. Stop number 1 is for coffee at the cutest place. I know we just had coffee, but... See Papa? We checked out the coffee shop, and now we're gonna look at the cheese shop.
And now I'm going to switch from using this new ZV-1 M2 to my usual talking head setup. And there you go, now I'm back and I can hold this camera and point at things while I'm talking to you about it. So this is a camera that in many ways is tough to review. I think that Sony has done an excellent job of listening to feedback from customers and improving on their product. And I think that if you're out there and you're looking for a one camera solution that fits into your back pocket and you don't want to go out and research lenses and you're okay with it, then this has all of the features of bigger, more expensive cameras in a much, much smaller, more manageable size. But there are some inherent problems, or I should call them compromises, when it comes to buying a 1-inch sensor camera. When you step down from an APS-C sensor down to a 1-inch sensor, you cross a little bit of a line, and that performance difference is pretty drastic. If you are outside in bright light, the 1-inch sensor works great. The colors are wonderful, the footage looks nice, the stabilization on this camera works great when you have it turned on, but even if you don't, it's okay because this camera records gyro data and you can use Catalyst Browse to stabilize your video clips, which I did. When you stabilize the clips, you can decide on a manual crop. I typically try to stay around a 10% crop if possible, and this does affect the image quality to me at least. I noticed that the image does look higher resolution when it's not stabilized, and also you get a wider field of view, which is nice. Even with the slight crop, the 4K video out of this camera looks great. It has the new Sony color science, and I especially like the built-in ND filter, which does come in handy on bright sunny days. There's even a setting where you can put it in ND auto, and the camera will enable and disable the ND as necessary. The lens is quite good as well. Just for fun, I compared it to an another walk around zoom, the Sigma 18-50 on my Sony ZV-10, and the results were, well, it looks worse than it is. The problem here is not that the lens is soft, it's just what you get with the smaller sensor. You can see that even in a decently lit room, the way the Sony ZV-10 and this new ZV-1M2 behave in aperture priority is very different. The little camera is shooting at 1600 ISO, and the result is a lot of grain, not a lot of clarity or contrast. So this camera isn't going to replace larger sensor cameras for photography. And again, this problem extends to low light, dim light at night, which is where you'll see a big difference between a little camera such as the new ZV-1 and a slightly larger camera such as the ZV-E10. And these are both shot in aperture priority. The smaller sensor catches less light, making the camera instantly drop to a minimum of 1/25 shutter speed, and the ISO skyrockets to 5000. Meanwhile, the ZV-E10 is at double the shutter speed and about a 2000 ISO in the same scene, and as things get darker, there's a massive difference. And I'm not saying that the solution or even the competitor to this new camera is the Sony ZV-E10, because you can see clearly here that with a small walk around zoom lens, this is not as pocketable as this little camera. And the price of this camera is roughly double when you consider the lens and the body of this new camera. So it's not the same thing, but it is important to realize what the shortcomings are of that smaller sensor. And so comparing it to another model in the lineup makes a little bit of sense from that standpoint. This little ZV-1M2 is a great camera to use. It's very easy, light, and compact. So easy that my 4-year-old son probably had more fun using it than even I did. One of the other complaints with the original ZV-1 was that you couldn't open the battery cover, which means you couldn't swap out batteries or SD cards if you had it mounted on a tripod. With the ZV-1M2, Sony has moved the tripod mount over to allow you full access to the battery and SD card. The microphone on this camera sounds great. The tracking and the autofocus is excellent, as good as what I have on my Sony FX30. There's a lot to like in this little camera body. The battery on this camera is quite small, so if you do pick up one of these, I would invest in 3 or 4 additional batteries, so that way you're not having to charge on the go every couple of hours. And undoubtedly in many reviews coming out today, you'll hear things such as, quote, the perfect travel vlog camera, quote, the perfect pocket companion, quote, the perfect tiny B camera, or quote, the perfect top-down camera. And you have to really consider some things before you leap at the thought of picking one of these up. I'll be the first to admit that out of the tiny 1-inch sensor camera lineup that Sony has released, this is by far the best camera. It's better than the original Z1, better than the RX100 lineup in most ways, and certainly better than the ZV-1F. But the trouble that I have with that is, unlike the ZV-1F, which comes in at $499 US, you have to pay $899 US for this new ZV-1. And that's almost double the price. And so I have to be a little bit more critical of this camera because it has to live up to that price. At $900, you are really close to the APS-C lineup. I mean, really, you can buy an APS-C camera body, especially used for $500–600 and a cheap good lens. Even so, at $900, I'm sure that Sony will sell a ton of these because there are people out there that are simply looking for a good, compact, all-in-one video creation camera with amazing autofocus, good colors, a great little lens attached, easy controls, great mic setup, etc. And those same people aren't necessarily the ones who might want to invest in an interchangeable lens camera and buy lenses for it. There's definitely a convenience factor that you are paying for this tiny camera. And really, when you compare this to Sony's older lineup, the RX100, Mark 7, 8, 9, whatever it was, Mark 8 probably, those were priced at, and are still priced at, $1,300 US. So this coming in at $900, which is, again, in most ways better than the RX line, Kind of makes sense. So there is some value here with this new camera, but I do think that there is perhaps more value in the original ZV-1, which after today should see a significant price drop. Maybe picking up one of those cameras for a few $100s is an idea. Certainly it's not as capable and not as good as this new one, but it's still a very good camera that can keep up with the other 1-inch sensor pocket cameras on the market. But that is just my opinion. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments section below. Are you excited about this release from Sony? Are you planning on picking one up? Are you not excited about it? Are you looking at something else? Are you happy with what you have? Always curious to read your guys' comments. They're awesome, and there's a lot of helpful comments down in the comments section all the time too. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks for all of your likes, all of your comments, and your support. Stay tuned for more. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.